Well, folks, as much as I don't want to think about it, we have to start somewhere. We have to start with the question of who's going to carry America first after President Trump. And as much as a lot of us would love to see President Trump get a third term, he's already stated the obvious.
Are you serious about taking a third term?
Everybody asks me that question, and you know that the law is very strong on that. I'd love to run, but the law is very strong.
And that is where this entire conversation is going to start, because if Trump is not the guy in 2028, then somebody has to carry America first forward. But the question is who? You know, as many of you know, I ran for Congress. Trump's endorsed me. I know him. I know J.D. Vance. Hell, I know Ron DeSantis and most of the people we're going to talk about today. But also I know quite a few of the people that are involved in this presidential race, the politics, the campaigns. And these folks, they understand something that many people don't, okay? It's that the person that we're all assuming is next may not be the person who actually gets there. Okay, the forces that are going to be at work behind the scenes are going to do everything that they can to make sure that their preferred candidate prevails. Okay, not everybody involved in deciding the future of this movement has America First at the top of their priority list. There's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's built around these presidential elections. You have consultants, you have donors, you have strategists, fundraisers, media, vendors. I mean, there's an enormous amount of people and an enormous amount of money that's open to be made when we start talking about the presidential race in the United States. So wherever that kind of money exists, you can bet that there are people that are going to try to influence that outcome. Hell, they're doing it now. So today, I'm not just looking at who's leading the polls. I'm looking at who can actually govern. I'm looking at who can actually hold the America First coalition together, who has the independent lane, who can win, who can survive everything that's going to come at them between now and 2028. And right now, I think there are 5 people who deserve to be taken seriously. So I want to start by ranking them. Before we do that, I want to give you the polling because that gives us a baseline. Okay, and I'm going to use the 3 top pollsters in the country. First is TIP. Okay, on May 26th through the 28th, they tested a very large Republican field. J.D. Vance was at 29%. Don Jr. was actually at 19%. Marco Rubio at 12%, and Ron DeSantis at 6%. Then we have Atlas Intel. They did another poll in May. They tested a little bit smaller field. Marco Rubio came in at 45.5%. J.D. Vance at 29%. Ron DeSantis at 11%. And you have Emerson, July 19th through the 20th. They had Vance at 39%, Rubio at 38%, DeSantis and Trump Jr. at 5%, and 9% were undecided. Now, look, people love taking these completely different polls and averaging them together and pretending that they discovered something, but they really didn't. I mean, there's different dates, different candidate lists, different populations, different methodologies. A lot of different factors come into play. So I'm not going to manufacture some fake average and tell you what it represents to the Republican electorate. What the polls actually tell us, though, is pretty simple. Vance leads in 2 of them and Rubio leads in 1. And this thing is nowhere close to being settled. More importantly, polling can't tell us who Trump is ultimately going to support. It can't tell us who builds the strongest organization. It can't tell us who can actually govern. And it definitely can't tell us who has the political instinct to survive a potential presidential primary. So with that, start out with my ranking. And we begin with number 5, Ted Cruz. Now, Ted has an enormous problem, trust. He has experience. He's pretty smart. So he's not lacking there. He's not lacking in political skill, but he's lacking in trust. Okay. There are still parts of the America First grassroots movement that simply don't trust Ted Cruz. And because of that alone, I don't think he can walk into 2028 assuming that those people are automatically going to come home and support him. Okay, when Cruz was asked about this in 2028, he did not shut the door.
Get eyeballs. I got a job. It's representing 31 million Texans, and it's fighting every day for 31 million Texans. And I'll tell you right now, the wins we are getting are historic. The one big, beautiful bill you were talking about just a minute ago, I was blessed to write major.
So he is leaving himself room. Okay. And Cruz obviously has the resume. He's been in the Senate since 2013. He ran nationally in 2016. He's in charge of the Senate Commerce Committee. He understands Washington, D.C. So, again, his experience is not the problem. Problem is, do we trust him? And what's his unique lane? What group of voters does Ted Cruz bring to the table that J.D. Vance, Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, or maybe Rand Paul can't reach more effectively? I don't see the answer to that yet, and I'm not sure I will. And that's why I have him at number 5. Could it change? Sure. But Cruz would have to rebuild trust with part of the grassroots to prove it. And you have to prove that he has a coalition that belongs to him. And I don't think he does. Number 4, Rand Paul. Now, I think people underestimate Rand Paul because Rand has something Ted Cruz does not, a pretty clear lane. People hear Rand Paul and they immediately think, well, he's a libertarian. But that's too narrow, okay? Sure, he has libertarians, but he also has access to anti-establishment voters, the younger crowd, the younger men, the independent-minded voters, people who listen to Joe Rogan, people who distrust foreign wars, people who distrust surveillance, the government. And that is a real part of the Trump coalition. Okay, Republicans should not assume that those voters are going to stay Republican forever. And Rand has almost always been more specific than most of these folks when he may run, when asked if he may run and when he would make the decision.
Yeah, I don't know yet. So maybe they know something I don't know. We're thinking about it, and I would say 50-50. We'll make a decision after the election, but I'm not going to do it just to do it. It would be, one, because we need to have a free market wing. We need to have a free trade wing of the party who's not eager for war and tries to at least explore diplomacy as an option to war.
Now, that matters, okay? Rand's already has an argument. War, trade, diplomacy, government power, civil liberties, surveillance, censorship. You know what Rand Paul believes right away. You may not agree with him, but I disagree with Rand on a few things, but at least you know where he stands. And in politics, that's pretty important. So the problem for Rand is not having a lane. That's not the same thing as having a winning coalition, though. He can dominate a certain type of voter and still never come close to winning the primary. So after the midterms, I'm going to be watching Rand to see if he broadens his coalition. Can he move beyond libertarians and anti-establishment voters? Will he try? If he can, then he becomes pretty dangerous. But if he can't, well, number 4 is probably where he will stay. All right, number 3. Now, this may surprise some of you, but I want you to hear me out. Number 3, I have Marco Rubio. Now, Marco may be the most complicated person on this list, okay? I know the media right now is propping him up, and he's doing a pretty good job in the administration. But, folks, you have to look at polling, and you have to make the argument, that he's changed. And, look, the polling has him much higher, too. But can he actually beat J.D. Vance? He's within 1 point with the Emerson poll, but there's a major complication, okay? Marco himself said that J.D. Vance, he runs, he'd support him.
I think we're going to make a lot of good things happen. J.D. is a very good friend of mine. If J.D. runs for president, I think he'd be a phenomenal candidate. I've said publicly, and I'll say it again, I'll be the first person to sign up and support him. I think J.D. would do great.
That doesn't mean Marco's out, okay? He could change his mind, okay? That doesn't mean there's not a secret deal. It doesn't mean that, he just, anything could happen, all right? Because, look, this matters because this ranking is partly about having an independent path. And right now, Marco has tied his independent path to J.D. Vance. So, that complicates things. There's another reason I'm cautious with Marco Rubio. And some people, you may disagree with me. Marco Rubio today is not the same political figure he was 10 years ago. He went through what I would call a political rebranding. And that's my analysis, okay? Marco of today talks much more about national sovereignty, about America first, about rebuilding the industry, about stable families, local jobs, globalization, okay, elite institutions. And I like what he's saying. I like what he's become, but I haven't forgotten the Marco Rubio from before. Now, you're going to say, well, J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio both attacked President Trump. And I agree. But here's the difference. what happened after? JD Vance basically said it. I was wrong. And Marco, he apologized for saying that President Trump had small hands, and that was about it. He's never made the same broad acknowledgement apologizing. And that matters to me, okay? Because Marco wasn't some outsider trying to figure out politics at the time, like JD. He'd already been in the business for years. He knew what he was doing, okay? JD was a young guy, and you can expect some things like that. But again, he apologized. Marco hasn't. But there's also some inside baseball, okay? I know that there are very powerful consultants who want Marco Rubio to run. And in my view, some of those people are already contributing to this constant Rubio versus Vance narrative instead of allowing the two to remain allies. And look, I'm not telling you there's some publicly proven coordinated operation. I'm telling you that I know how this works. I know the people involved. I know how much money is sitting around. And if Trump leaves office with JD Vance and Marco Rubio as two of the most popular Republicans in America, there will be people who make a lot of money by turning those two and their friendship into a war. That's something you have to watch pretty closely. Okay. Now, Marco's number 3 because he's strong and he's viable. He can absolutely become a major candidate. But today, I think his independent path is not clear. Now, move into number 2. And this may frustrate some of you. Ron DeSantis. Now, I know there are some of you that still don't like Ron because of 2024. I understand that. But look, I'm not going to pretend that Ron DeSantis hasn't been one of the best governors I've ever seen. He can lead. And unlike most of the people on the list, Ron DeSantis has already done something extremely important. He's built a national presidential campaign. Not failed, but he built it. He raised some serious money. He made some national tread work. He's built an organization, went through the process. He learned exactly how brutal the campaign can be. And I think DeSantis made a massive mistake in 2024. He listened to powerful donors and consultants who convinced him that there's a path to beating Donald Trump, or that Donald Trump may not be the nominee because of other reasons. And look, Trump wasn't going to back down, and he had control of the base. All right. And then some of those same donors, well, they ended up abandoning DeSantis and going right back to Trump. And that's understandable. And look, Trump and DeSantis have made amends since then. All right. But the difference going into 2028 is that Trump's not going to be on the ballot. So does DeSantis try again? Well,
I mean, I think that, in 24, like in Iowa, the people that voted for Trump, if he wasn't running, I would have gotten like 90% of those people. They were conservative voters, right? They didn't want the non-conservative that, they wanted me. And so, but the timing didn't work out, obviously, for that. So you just got to see what happens.
Now, it's not a no. And if he does run again, he's got something most of this list can't claim. He has an executive record. He's governed in Florida since 2019. He's fought some pretty major wars like Disney. He had major educational institutions fighting him. He's fought federal pressure. He's dealt with immigration, budgets, hurricanes, legislatures. I mean, actual executive government. And that matters because being good on TV or Twitter is not the same as running a government. And this is where I separate DeSantis from Rubio. Rubio might poll better in some national tests, but DeSantis has already proven he's willing to stand up to his critics. He can build a campaign. He can run independently. And look, they're both from Florida. And I think Ron DeSantis is stronger in Florida than Rubio. And he ran against the most powerful Republican in America and lost, but he did it. And that tells me something. Now, DeSantis, he also has a huge problem, and it's JD Vance. And some of the donors who back DeSantis, they're going to come back in 2028, but they now have another option. And JD Vance has something that Ron DeSantis didn't have the last time around. The Trump coalition already knows him. So if Ron wants another shot, he's got to prove that he's learned from 24, then he can still sell himself as something more than the guy who once tried to beat Trump. And I tell you right now, if I were to pick my dream ticket, it would be JD Vance for president and Ron DeSantis for vice president. I know they're friends. I know they work well together. And ultimately, I think that ticket would be extremely hard to beat. You may say you like Vance and Rubio. Hey, that's fine. You can say that all you want. But my opinion is JD Vance and Ron DeSantis. And you'd have America First continuity at the top and one of the strongest Republican executive records underneath him. And that brings me to why JD Vance is number one. He's the guy to beat. He's the VP. He has the national visibility. He has a direct relationship with President Trump. He usually leads in these national polls, and he's currently the person best positioned to carry the coalition into the next era. JD also has another advantage that people should not overlook, and that's Don Jr. JD Vance and Don Jr. are very good friends, and that matters because Don Jr. is going to be one of the most influential people in President Trump's political orbit. He has his dad's ear. He understands the grassroots, and he has enormous influence inside of the broader Trump political network. So when you look at JD's position, it's not just that he's the VP, not just that he has a relationship with President Trump, he also has strong relationships inside of Trump's family and inside the political network that surrounds the president. Now, that doesn't guarantee him anything, but in a race where President Trump's eventual preference could reshape the entire fight, that matters. And JD himself seems to understand that more than anybody because he thinks this.
There are a lot of great people. I think if I do end up running, it's not going to be given to me either on the Republican side or on the national side. So I'm just going to keep on working hard. I think this is the most important job that I've ever had.
Now, that's exactly the right posture from him. Okay. JD Vance doesn't own the nomination because nobody does. But the biggest challenge he's going to face is that Trump's coalition is not automatically transferable. Okay. If you think about who is inside this thing, working class voters, populists, libertarians, evangelicals, traditional Republicans, union households, young men, independents, and people who barely voted Republican before Trump, people who still don't consider themselves Republicans today. Trump somehow held a massive number of those people together all at the same time. That's incredibly difficult to replicate. So Vance has the best position to do that. I think personally, I know him. And again, he has that persona. Okay. But he still has to prove that, the people are loyal to the movement and maybe not just personally loyal to President Trump. And that's the question that he's going to have to face. So can JD Vance inherit the Trump coalition, or does part of it fracture the moment that President Trump's no longer on the ballot? That question could decide 2028. And that's why I have Vance as number one. Again, not because he's been crowned, but because today he has the strongest opportunity to earn it. So here's my ranking. Ted Cruz, number 5. He's experienced. Okay. Got a trust problem. Rand Paul, number 4. Real independent lane, but he has to prove he can become a national brand. 3, Marco Rubio. He's strong, serious political support, but his path is complicated by his own stated support for JD Vance and the reluctancy of some voters to believe that Marco's truly changed. Number 2, Ron DeSantis. Executive record, national campaign experience, friends with JD Vance, made amends with President Trump, huge donor base, and a proven willingness to go out and build something independently. And ultimately, number 1, JD Vance. The office, the visibility, the relationship with the president, the relationship with the Trump orbit, and the clearest opportunity right now to carry this America First movement forward. Again, nobody owns it, but this list is where I see it today. The Trump endorsement could change it. So could a declaration of running or not running. So could a major donor. But look, the next major checkpoint for this, I think, is going to be November 3rd after the midterms. So that's when people are going to start paying attention to what these guys say, and especially when somebody sticks a microphone in their face. So we'll have to watch what they do and see who starts traveling, who starts hiring, raising money, and building the organization. That's the test. So pay very close attention, folks. And look, let me know what you think in the comments. Okay. Machinery is going to start moving here pretty shortly. And I'd love to hear what you think. Don't get mad at me for picking JD Vance. Okay. He's a friend of mine. Don't tell me about the conspiracy theories about him online, because they're all lies. All right. God bless you, folks. Have a good one.